Howdy folks, hope you all had a great weekend and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Today's episode, thankfully, for my mortgage at least, and for any of you who are remotely serious about keeping your online data safe, today's episode is once again sponsored by a sponsor that I'm always happy to promote, Nordpass. You can get yourself a copy of Nordpass covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee by heading over to nordpass.com/jingles and using code JINGLES or just clicking the link in the video description. Sure, you can store all of your passwords in your browser. You can use the same email address and password for every site that you visit. You can even have password be your password, if that's your thing. And it probably won't come back to bite you in the arse. And while it's true that major sites like Amazon or eBay or Google have pretty tight security, and it's unlikely that you're going to have your credentials stolen from them, the hairdresser that you book your appointments with, or the online butcher that you buy your fancy Italian meats from, probably doesn't have the same level of online security. And if they ever get hacked, and you're using the same password and email address for everything, all the hacker has to do is take that combination of credentials on a fishing expedition around the big sites, and you wake up the next morning and find out you've just spent $3,000 on Amazon gift vouchers. At the same time though, I get it. Having to come up with a unique, unguessable, and easily rememberable password for every site that you log into is basically impossible. And that, of course, is what the hackers are counting on. And that is the advantage of Nordpass, because it just does it all for you, as well as a whole lot more. But it's the password protection that's the main selling point, and you can get that, as well as some online peace of mind, by going over to nordpass.com/jingles, using code JINGLES, all covered by their 30-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. So, what's been going on this week? I suppose the big gaming news is just how incredibly successful Helldivers 2 has been. If you were like me and you'd never heard of it until it came out, you've probably heard of it now because it's basically everywhere. Massively successful co-op shooter. Heavily inspired by Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers movie. I mean, they really lean into the satire. It's hilarious. Being sold for a reasonable price. About half the cost of a AAA video game release. More on that in a bit. Yes, don't worry Ubisoft, we're going to get to you. The game, like, as far as I'm concerned, came out of nowhere. And it's been taking the internet by storm because it's just a good game. It's fun. And it mostly just works. I mean, it's not completely bug-free. Get it? Bugs? Starship Troopers? Never mind. Note to self, never try to make that joke again. But yeah, it's not 100% bug-free, but it mostly just works exactly as it should. And the developers are working hard to patch it extensively and knock those bugs down as quickly as they pop up. Isn't it just amazing what you can achieve? The kind of success you can achieve if you just focus on making a good game that works at a reasonable price. Meanwhile, over at Ubisoft... Oh, Ubisoft. So, Skull and Bones just came out. And I did have a quick go of it about a month ago when it was an open beta. And for those of you who aren't aware of what Skull and Bones is, it's the sort of spiritual successor to Assassin's Creed Black Flag, or at least that was what it was supposed to be, I think 11 years ago when it first went into development. Been worked on by at least 7 or 8 different Ubisoft studios, although primarily Ubisoft Singapore, and there's a very good reason for that. Suffered a prolonged development process, originally supposed to be a kind of Assassin's Creed Black Flag spin-off, where instead of everything else that happens in an Assassin's Creed game, it was largely just focused on the ship combat, which was kind of revolutionary at the time, and was very good in Assassin's Creed Black Flag. However, during this tortured development process, it kind of got dragged around between all kinds of different Ubisoft studios, all sticking their oar in and trying to take the game in different directions, and they were really struggling to nail down what the game was supposed to be. And after nearly a decade of development, in fact, might even be more than a decade of development, depending on who you ask, but a very long development cycle, what's come out is basically Assassin's Creed Black Flag, but just the sailing bits. Or in other words, after the game being taken in a dozen different directions by a dozen different Ubisoft studios, it's gone back to what it was originally supposed to be 11 years ago. And when I got my hands on it during that closed beta weekend, while I did enjoy what was on offer, I was left with one rather large concern. And that can basically be expressed as, is that it? Because there wasn't an awful lot to it, other than sailing around and doing piratey stuff. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because who doesn't like sailing around doing piratey stuff? And if that's your bag, well, the only other show in town for a couple of years now has really been Sea of Thieves. And Sea of Thieves isn't terrible. It was on launch. It's gotten significantly better since. But it's it's got a very distinct style. It's very cartoony. It's not quite as serious as something like Assassin's Creed Black Flag was. And, you know, that's fine. But it's not necessarily going to be to everybody's taste. So they had this huge opportunity with Skull and Bones to expand upon all of the sailing around piratey bits from Assassin's Creed Black Flag. And they had 10 or 11 years in which to do it. 10 or 11 years to build upon and expand on all of the piratey bits from Black Flag that everybody loved so much. And what they in fact did was to cut down on all of the sailing around piratey bits from Black Flag that everybody loved so much. It's actually worse. There is less to do. Do you remember the boarding actions in Black Flag? They were just incredible. I mean, you would scale the mast and swing across to the other ship and engage in hand-to-hand combat and defeat the enemy crew and then loot the ship and sink it and sail off singing sea shanties. You know, the actually being a pirate part of the game. Boarding other ships, looting their treasure, sinking them and then sailing off with your ill-gotten goods. They have boarding actions in Skull and Bones. You sail up next to an enemy ship, you grapple it, the screen goes black, a message appears saying boarding completed, and when the screen comes back up, the enemy ship has sunk and you're already sailing off. They actually cut out the pirate bits from a pirate game, and nobody at Ubisoft at any point apparently put their hand up and said, hang on a minute, does nobody think we're missing the point here? They've taken a decade to make a game that is objectively worse than the game upon which it's based, with less features, arguably worse graphics. They certainly have worse character models. And while the overall graphics in Skull and Bones are definitely not bad, they are arguably no better than the 11-year-old game upon which it's based. An 11-year-old game that comes with at least twice as many features as the new title that is supposed to build upon and expand on it. And then, a week before release, rather than lowering the price to kind of, you know, match people's expectations, Ubisoft hiked the price up to $70. $70 on console, $60 on PC. And then had the nerve to defend this price hike in a game, right, that is basically a live service game that comes with battle passes, a cosmetic store, you know, all the usual shit that you'd expect of a free-to-play title, that they're shoehorning into a game that's costing $70, because of course they are, it's Ubisoft. And Ubisoft's president went on record defending this outrageous price gouge by saying that it wasn't a AAA title, it was a quadruple A title. A quadruple A title that's been in development for a decade and is released with arguably worse graphics and half the features of the game that it's supposed to expand upon. You might be asking yourself, how the hell did this happen? And the obvious answer is because Ubisoft, but there is actually, well, there is another reason. Remember I said that Ubisoft Singapore were taking the lead on this whole Skull and Bones project all those years ago when it was first being developed? The reason for that, and this game cost $200 million to make, by the way.
Drowning won't change anything.
The reason Ubisoft Singapore were taking the lead was because Ubisoft signed a contract with the government of Singapore to create a studio in Singapore and develop a game using local talent. Ubisoft didn't have any choice. The reason it took this game 10 years to come out was because they had no idea what they were going to do with it, but they were legally and contractually obliged to produce a game because of the massive subsidies that the Singapore government had been paying them in order to do exactly that.
I'll talk to her.
Skull and Bones didn't come out because it was a game that Ubisoft wanted to make. It came out because it was a game that Ubisoft had to make.
Do what you gotta do.
It was a situation tailor-made for a game studio to pump out the lowest quality product they could possibly get away with, while at the same time satisfying their legal obligations. And so it should come as no surprise that we've ended up with the lowest quality product they could possibly manage to pump out, while at the same time satisfying their legal obligations. And they're charging $70 for it. And there's a battle pass. And there's an in-game store. Not because, as Ubisoft's president is keen to point out, it is a quadruple A title, but because it cost them $200 million to make, and they desperately need to make some of that money back before their annual shareholders meeting. And in other news, also at Ubisoft, while this litany of management failures was going on, French labour unions are calling for a strike by Ubisoft employees, because it turns out, in a move that will come as absolutely no surprise to anybody who's familiar with Ubisoft, that during mandatory annual wage negotiations for the second year in a row, Ubisoft's management have been offering raises to their employees below the rate of inflation, despite, and I'm quoting directly from Ubisoft themselves here, excellent second quarter results well above our expectations in its recent first half 2023-2024 financial report, and then turned around and offered its employees a worse pay rise than last year, which is below the rate of inflation for the second year in a row. Now, it could be significantly worse. At least they haven't fired 800 employees right after announcing record profits and record bonuses to all their executives, but at the same time, just because the company isn't quite as fundamentally evil with regards to the well-being of their own employees as something like Blizzard Activision doesn't put Ubisoft on the side of the angels, as a result of which Ubisoft employees' representatives have said, "We cannot tolerate being treated as expendable to mitigate their bad decisions." Sounds perfectly reasonable, but bad decisions by management? What sort of bad decisions are you talking about? Could you possibly be referring to a game that took 11 years to make, cost $200 million, was objectively worse than the game upon which it was based, and only came out in the first place because management had accepted massive subsidies from a national government in order to produce a game that they were contractually and legally obliged to actually release at some point, regardless of whether or not it was any good, and then charge $70 for it, while at the same time cramming in every possible monetization feature in order to desperately try to claw back some of those $200 million costs. I'm not saying the two things are connected, but hey, if the shoe fits. Now, I don't want all of this to sound completely negative, although it's difficult to do anything other than sound negative when you're talking about a quadruple A games publisher. It's not necessarily the case that Skull and Bones is a bad game. I mean, it is unarguably and objectively not as good a game as Assassin's Creed Black Flag, the game upon which it's based. It has less features, it doesn't look any better, and certainly the character models and animations are objectively worse. But that doesn't mean you're not going to enjoy playing it. The problem is that massive $70 bar to entry. Who's going to want to lay down $70 on a game that they don't know whether or not they're actually going to enjoy? Now, you can go to YouTube, of course. There are all kinds of reviews, mostly negative, and gameplay videos up. But just because somebody on YouTube doesn't like it doesn't mean that you won't. I mean, I'm sure the game's going to find an audience because it's a pirate game. And aside from Sea of Thieves, which is heavily stylized and not everybody's conceptual cup of tea, there isn't really anything else on the market. But who wants to pay $70 in order to find out whether or not they're actually going to have fun playing something? You can't even tell how well or how many other people are enjoying playing it, because it is basically a multiplayer game. There do need to be other people playing it in order for it to work. And because the game wasn't published on Steam, you can only get it through the Ubisoft launcher. There's no way of seeing how many other people happen to be playing it or enjoying it at any one time. There is, however, an option. You can actually download and play a free trial, which is good for 8 hours of playtime. 8 hours is enough to get through the intro and the tutorials and get a good couple of hours of actual gameplay under your belt, allowing you to figure out whether or not it's actually worth laying down the full, although it isn't, but in order, I mean, $70, come on. But the option is there, and apparently if you do decide to lay down the full $70 for it, you keep the progress that you made during the free trial period. So there's that. It's not all bad news. In other news, going back to last week's video, in which I delivered a roundup of not necessarily games that are coming out in 2024, but games, most of which are coming out in 2024 that I was looking forward to. And I made the massive mistake of saying that Squadron 42, the single-player component of Star Citizen, was coming out this year. Instantly, all of the disciples of the Holy Church of Chris Roberts jumped all over me in the comments saying, no, Jingles. Nobody's promised that Squadron 42 is actually coming out this year, and they are, of course, technically completely correct. It turns out that I just made the hopelessly optimistic and naive assumption that when the developers announced that Squadron 42, the single-player component, the standalone single-player component of Star Citizen, was feature complete, and they were moving the vast bulk of the Squadron 42 development team from Squadron 42 over to the Star Citizen Persistent Universe, a separate title, and the remaining staff on Squadron 42 were merely engaging in polishing what was already there. I made the hopelessly optimistic assumption that that meant we might actually get to see Squadron 42 during our lifetimes. Clearly, this is not the case. So I apologise unreservedly for implying that we might actually get to see Squadron 42 within a year of it being functionally finished. What can I say? I forgot that we were dealing with Star Citizen timescales here. While we're on the subject of Star Citizen though, because I am a Star Citizen backer, and I have been for more than 10 years, there was something that I noticed that caused me a little bit of concern. So, there's something that I noticed with Star Citizen. And I can't remember what exactly it was that brought it to my attention, but here's my Star Citizen account page. Now, I've been backing this game for more than 10 years. Still no actual game for me to play, but I mean, you know, Star Citizen. So let's just take a quick look. Because initially, I got very excited, and I bought a bunch of stuff. So I've got a Hornet Ghost, an Aegis Dynamics Avenger, a Retaliator Heavy Bomber, the Origin 325A Fighter, an RSI Constellation, and the first thing that I bought, the Digital Freelancer. Let's just take a look at what comes with these packs. So the Freelancer, you come with you get the ship, and a whole bunch of stuff, some starting money. I mean, that's nothing. But you get access to Squadron 42 and Star Citizen and so on and so on. And the ship comes with 6 months insurance. So that's the Freelancer. There's the Constellation. And with this, you get the Constellation Andromeda, a hangar pass for the very, very fancy Revel and York hangar, and 6 months insurance. The Origin 325A Fighter, same deal. Hangar, ship, 6 months insurance. The Aegis Dynamics Retaliator Heavy Bomber LTI comes with the ship, lifetime insurance. All right, and so on and so on. The Avenger, 6 months insurance. The Hornet Ghost, 6 months insurance, and so on. You get the general idea. What's concerning about this? So the Retaliator Heavy Bomber is the only one that comes with lifetime insurance. All right. Where's my constellation? Here we go. Let us have a look at the constellation Andromeda. Can I actually get here from... No. Okay, so let's go to the pledge page. There we go, the pledge store. And let's have a look at ships. And we'll search for the Andromeda. There we go, Constellation Andromeda, medium freight / gunship. Let's check it out. View buying options. Constellation Andromeda, standalone ship. You get the ship, Revel and York hangar, 6 months insurance. So that's basically the package that I got. This is £230.40. But that's not the version of the Andromeda that I actually have. I have the Constellation Aquila. So let's have a look at the variants. There we go. There was an upgrade for it. Buying options. £302.40. Comes with the Constellation Aquila, the Revel and York hangar pass, and 6 months insurance. It's this insurance thing that's concerning. Because what this means is once the game starts, whichever decade that happens in, the ship is only insured for the first 6 months. The Retaliator Heavy Bomber has lifetime insurance. This means that after that 6 month period has expired, if I'm flying around in my Constellation Aquila and it gets destroyed, a ship that I have paid £302 for, it's gone forever. I have to buy a new one. This applies to every single ship that I have purchased in this game, except for the Retaliator Heavy Bomber, which is the only one that comes with lifetime insurance. This is a big problem. Because I'm not the only one who's in this situation. There are very few. Remember, you're paying real money for these things. And you can lose them in a heartbeat. And you don't get them back if the insurance period has expired. I would not be at all surprised if you're going to find that when this game eventually launches and these insurance periods run out, a game that you have paid for, by the way, you know, it's Star Citizen is not a free-to-play game. You must buy a game package. I would not be at all surprised if you didn't find that there was a monthly subscription that Roberts Space Industries were selling that comes with extended insurance warranties for all of the ships that you have paid hundreds and thousands of dollars for and are at risk of losing if they get blown up on you after that insurance period has expired. To put this into some kind of context, imagine you bought a premium ship in World of Warships and you take it out for battle and it gets sunk. And before you can play that ship again, a ship that you've paid real money for, you either have to buy a new one or buy a subscription. And I don't even know, by the way, whether or not this whole buying a subscription in order to extend your insurance warranty on the ships that you've paid hundreds and thousands of dollars for in Star Citizen, I don't even know whether or not that's actually going to be the case. I'm just trying to spitball potential solutions here to what, to me at least, seems like being a fairly significant problem. I mean, it's also possible that you'll be able to use money that you earn in-game to extend warranties, and it isn't going to cost you anything. In fact, I mean, in the absence of any clarifying information on this issue from Star Citizen, I wouldn't be surprised if that did actually turn out to be the case, but I would be equally unsurprised if there ended up being some kind of premium option that was going to end up costing you even more actual real money. So, on that optimistic note, and I look forward once again to seeing the replies from the disciples of the Holy Church of Chris Roberts. But that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's given you something to think about. And if it's given you anything to talk about, you know where the comment section is. In the meantime, as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.